Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Starting with a couple of short questions. Mr. Precep, number one, you stated this was a very grave threat, that the attempts to probe and upset our local election systems. Any doubt it was the Russians?
No, sir.
Any doubt that they'll be back?
No, sir.
To our DHS witnesses, have the 21 states that you've mentioned that we know where it had this happen been notified officially?
So the owners of the systems within those 21 states have been notified.
How about the election officials in those states?
We are working to ensure that election officials as well understand. I'll have to get back to you on whether all 21 states.
Have you had a conference of all state election officials, secretaries of state here in Washington on this issue?
I have had at least 2 teleconferences and in-person conferences. We will be engaging with them in July, I believe.
Well, I would urge you to put some urgency on this. We've got another election coming in 18 months, and if we're talking about systems and registration rolls, the time is going by. So I believe this is, as we've already heard characterized, a very grave threat.
Yes,
it's
sir.
going to be back, and shame on us if we're not prepared.
Yes, sir. We have biweekly, every other week, we hold a teleconference with all relevant election officials. The national associations that represent those individuals have nominated bipartisan individuals to engage with us on a regular basis. This is of the utmost urgency for the department and this government to ensure that we have better protections going forward. But the community, the election community, is similarly committed and has been so for years.
And just to be clear, nobody's talking about a federal takeover of local
Absolutely.
election systems or federal rules. What we're talking about is technical assistance, information, and perhaps some funding at some point.
So this is similar to our engagement with all critical infrastructure sectors, whether it's the electrical sector, the nuclear sector, the financial sector, is completely voluntary, and it is about this department providing information both to potential victims but to all network defenders to ensure that they have access to what we have access to and can better defend themselves.
Thank you. Mr. Lyles, I'll take issue with something that you said, that we have a national election and it was too large, too diverse to really crack. We don't have a national election. What we have are 50 state elections. And each election in the states can depend upon a certain number of counties. There are probably 500 people within the sound of my voice who could tell you which 10 counties in the United States will determine the next presidential election. And so you really, a sophisticated actor could hack a presidential election simply by focusing on particular counties. Senator Rubio, I'm sure, remembers Dade County in the year 2000. And the significance that had to determining who the next president of the United States was. So I don't think it works to just say, oh, it's a big system and the very diversity will protect us, because it really is county by county, city by city, state by state, and a sophisticated actor, which the Russians are, could easily determine where to direct their attack. So I don't want to rely on the diversity. Second, a separate point is, what do we recommend? And we've talked about paper backups. The Dutch just had an election where they just decided to make it all paper and count the ballots by hand for this very reason. So what would you tell my elections clerk in Brunswick, Maine, Ms. Marfa, would be the top 3 things he or she should think about in protecting themselves in this situation?
Sir, I would say to first, as previous senators mentioned, prioritize the security of your voting machines and the vote tallying systems. Ensure that they are not connected to the internet, even if that is enabled on those particular devices. Second, ensure that you have an auditing process in place where you can identify anomalies throughout the process. Educate polling workers to look for suspicious activity, for example.
But doesn't auditing mean a paper trail, a paper backup?
Yes, sir. I would recommend a paper backup.
And one of the worrisome things, again, on the issue of the national, we talk about how diverse it is, but aren't we seeing a consolidation in terms of the vendors who are producing these machines?
Yes, sir. It is my understanding that we are seeing some consolidation in the vendor community. Again, many of them are committed and have engaged on the voluntary voting standards and guidelines, which partly include security. We will be updating those security guidelines in 2018, and Yes, while there is some concern about consolidation, we do look forward to engaging with them, and as of now, they are a very engaged community.
I think this aspect of this question that this committee is looking at is one of the most important and frankly, one of the most daunting because we've pretty well determined that they weren't successful in changing tallies and changing votes, but they weren't doing what they did in at least 21 states for fun. And they are going to be back, and they're going to be back with knowledge and information that they didn't have before. So I commend you for your attention to this and certainly hope that this is treated with the absolute utmost urgency. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lang.